All right. Hey, thanks for coming to this webinar. It's definitely a different format than what I was expecting to present at this year, but nonetheless, the show must go on. Thanks to Mandy and everybody at Chef for really making sure that the ChefConf still continued in this online format. So my talk is titled Mise en place, Preparing Your Organization for a Successful Chef Journey. And before I really dig into mise en place, I do want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Justin Reve. I work at Culinary Mutual Group. I primarily focus on our infrastructure as code, configuration management, and infrastructure monitoring. My interests are board games, PC games, fishing, and open source projects. Mise en place is a phrase in French that's widely used in the culinary world. It means to put everything into place, or to stage your ingredients so that you have minimal effort to put your meal together in the kitchen, or to cook, right? A lot of folks take it to the extreme where you don't do any sort of cooking without having everything in place at first. And it's possible to apply the concepts of mise en place to automation and tool adoption. It's really core to automation. Automation really is mise en place. We anticipate what's needed to be done and stage our ingredients ahead of time. You probably practice mise en place every day. Your clothes are pre-selected for work, or you prepare for going out to the theater or something. Or if you've ever even just like pre-chopped ingredients before cooking, right? You've actually done some form of mise en place. It's also core to Agile and Scrum, if you think about it. In Agile frameworks, we plan ahead as far as is reasonable. We refine our work so that when it comes time to actually do the work, we just pull it into a sprint or on a Kanban board and it's ready to go. Our user stories are well defined. Our acceptance criteria is all set. Mise en place is Agile. Mise en place can also be smart monitoring. When we apply smart monitoring to our systems, that gives us relevant information. As soon as something looks like it's going to break or has broken, it provides us with those details that we need about that outage, or the predicted outage, so we can start our work to resolve it. We have what we need in place. So let's briefly touch on today's topics. I want to qualify that this presentation is not all-inclusive, but highlights several important areas of preparing your organization for a successful journey with Chef Infra. Some of these things are very much a work in progress at Culinary Mutual Group. I'm not going to say we're perfect on everything, but we definitely want to share what we're doing to make Chef Infra work for us. First, we'll go over community. There's something that is extremely important to establish quickly and constantly focus on building. For a lot of organizations, adopting a tool like Chef Infra will not only require a technical change, but also kind of a mindset change of how work is done. Building a strong, supportive community is key to success with Chef. After that, we're going to go after the business case a little bit. It might seem like an unimportant aspect to some, and quite frankly, it can be pretty boring. But getting funding for a new tool can be challenging, and knowing how to build a solid business case is key for most to get funding. We're also going to talk a little bit about removing friction. It's one of the core concepts of mise en place, making sure that you don't have to do too much to get accomplished or built what you want to build. Using Chef Infra should be easy. It should be your easiest option available at your organization. If something is easier, people are naturally going to tend to go towards it, the path of least resistance, right? Nobody wants to do something that's going to be hard if there's an easier way to get there. Finally, we're going to take a quick peek at a sample backlog to get you started, or to maybe augment some of your current efforts. Right now, it's in Azure DevOps. I'll be posting it on my blog, so it's more publicly accessible. So let's start off with community. A strong community can accomplish anything. At least I think that way. A strong community is vital for any sort of process or tool to survive. A strong community can honestly be the difference between success and failure. So let's talk a little bit about the initial team. The initial team are those not afraid to tilt at windmills. I was kind of labeled as a Don Quixote figure a little bit early on in my IT career. The initial team is an extremely important aspect to adopting any technology or process change. Usually in technology adoption story, the initial team is presented with a challenge that they're trying to overcome, right? It's their problem statement. We have this problem. We need to automate this thing because it's taking up this much time, or this is so inconsistent, it's causing problems inside of our environment. So our initial team was a team that was focused on pairing with development teams and automating their platforms. We had a few consultants that were on our team over the first year and a half, as well as developers, a product owner with an architectural and development background, a web administrator, network engineers, a DBA. We had Scrum Masters cheering us on, and leaders who weren't afraid to take a risk. The team can't be afraid to ask why. This isn't just a license to change whatever you want, but sometimes when you ask why, you find the reasoning was sound like back then, but not now, right? The team identifies their solution and begins to prove it out with vendor help, consultants, contractors, or just on their own. For us, we chose Chef Infra with the help of our consultants after comparing it to other config management tools and started a proof of concept in a small isolated corner. But failures are going to happen. You can't be afraid to fail. Things will not always be easy. It's important for the team to know that if they do fail, that leadership is going to have their back. They're going to support and nurture the innovation attempts. Not every sprint that we had was a full success. We ran into a lot of frustrating barriers, some organizational, some technology based. But because we were allowed to experiment and innovate, we came up with some great self-service solutions that didn't even exist prior to the chef journey. And because we failed fast, we were able to advance other related skill sets faster than before, right? Or just learn entirely new skills because we were allowed to innovate. So that leadership support is truly key. You need to grow your crowd, and you can't wait until you scale out. The longer you wait, the kind of harder it is to build up good momentum. There comes a period when your proof of concept gets too large or successful enough that you can envision it becoming a standard across your organization. But you really need to keep growing your audience and your team. The sooner the better. Something you can do to show quick value with Chef Infra and Chef Inspec and gain traction within your organization is to bring your compliance experts in early and keep them engaged. The power of Chef Inspec combined with codifying audit controls can be a real boon to your organization. I can guarantee that your compliance personnel will be on the edge of their seats. I know ours certainly have been. Architects are also another important group to engage early and often. Designing an organization-wide solution requires an organization-wide lens. Architects often bring a fresh perspective to the table and can help research how your products is going to integrate or maybe even conflict with other solutions in the environment. It's incredibly important if there are going to be conflicts with how your product works, you identify and fix those as soon as you can. Nothing kills a product faster than it causing outages within the organization, right? That's terrible to have, the first association with your product be, oh, it took down production. Security is also another key stakeholder. And I went back and forth on saying security ops or our intrusion people, really just security in general as a stakeholder. Everybody whose job is security is a key stakeholder for the Chef Infra ecosystem. Whether it's a team that's trying to detect attacks, prevent intrusion, create hardening standards, they've got to be involved as soon as possible. You can't do this in a bubble and you can't do this on an island. Your dev teams are also an early part of your crowd. Don't leave them in the dark about what Chef Infra is just doing to their systems. And honestly, a lot of development teams can benefit from idempotency that Chef Infra brings to their systems, giving them a little bit more peace of mind that, hey, my system is configured the exact way as dev and test, right? Developers were certainly a large part of our early crowd, and they continue to be a large part of our development base at CUNY Mutual. IT leaders should also be aware of the value you're bringing to the organization and why they're paying for Chef Infra to begin with. Keep them informed with good marketing and in the sprint reviews. Don't be afraid to cheerlead your own efforts, and highlight the accomplishments that your team has had. Finally, but definitely not the least, the chef community and chef support can save you a lot of time. If you're having issues, reach out. If you're not sure how to do something, ask somebody. More often than not, somebody's actually gonna help you out. And usually even on the chef community Slack, it's somebody from Chef, who says, oh, let me help, drop what I'm doing for a few minutes and try to help this person out. It's absolutely incredible. One word on marketing. And this is definitely part of building your community. You must market Chef like it's a product, but don't oversell it or overhype it. Remember, Chef Infra and Chef Inspect are extremely powerful automation tools. They will not solve every technical or organizational challenge that your company faces. Um, you know, my organization has seen success marketing Chef internally kind of in depth, right? We've used our chat channels to post webhooks from our CI/CD pipelines, from our core cookbooks, to post announcements about our service and release notes, and to help others how to use Chef Infra on those chats. And we've helped people. We basically built like almost like an internal community Slack, for lack of a better phrase. We also centralized our documentation so that others would consume it without having to look too hard. We built a service site. I'm going to take a brief pause here, and kind of call out. There was an awesome MasterCard presentation in last year, and kind of inspired this like service site that like we built that shows the status of our Chef infrastructure, work items, bugs in progress, recently completed items, as well as like links to the official documentation and our currently supported versions of Chef Infra Client, Workstation, Server, and Automate. We even have pieces of like monitoring on that Chef service site to show the exact status of our infrastructure. Word of mouth marketing is also extremely important. Verbalizing your success, your crazy theories on what could be done, or how you might use Chef Infra to solve a unique challenge. Just talking to others can help grow your crowd and make them part of the solution, right? Like you might have that one developer friend that is running into this one problem, and you might propose a solution that they can actually be a part of and help you write the code. And then we also took a more traditional route of marketing. We actually developed some posters and put them around the office so that people would see, hey, this is what people are talking about Chef about. Like this is what the tool is going to do for us, or this is how we can leverage the tool to make our infrastructure better. So enough about community. Let's move on to the business case. The business case is all about making that ask based on business outcomes. The business case can be one of the trickiest parts of bringing a tool into an organization. How do you justify the cost versus the benefit? With automation tools like Chef Infra, you don't always see it making money for your organization. Customers aren't paying you because you're using it, right? Nobody's coming to your door and saying, oh, you use Chef, let me buy your product. So where's the value? Where's the intrinsic business value? When value is hidden or obscured even by one layer, it can be harder to sell the business on cost. The trick is to focus on business outcomes. You should first and foremost always make your business case on business outcomes. It's right in the name, right? It's the business case, not the technology case, not the problem case, it's the business case, right? The business will care about their outcomes. So you have to shape your business case in those terms that the business is going to care about. And you have to be careful about time savings. It's not always the best way to make your business case. The business may not care if you make a change over a 3-day period or an hour if it does nothing for the customer experience or the bottom line of the business. Time can be money, right? Like I get that, and I think we all get that. Like engineers spending 30 seconds doing something versus 3 hours doing something, there's a huge time value benefit there, right? But the business might not actually care about that, again, if that's not leading to business outcomes. So sometimes it's not a direct translation between time and money. Instead, you should focus on risk reduction. So risk is something that businesses generally understand, and risk generally translates into a financial term, right? If a business is going to lose $1 million if we get breached or if there's like data loss somewhere, right? But we can mitigate that risk by buying software for $10,000. It's like a no-brainer, right? The business says, oh wait, I can basically buy insurance, right, for this risk, and it's going to be a tiny fraction of that risk. They'll always go that way. Nobody wants to be left with standing with a hat in their hand saying, oh, I decided I didn't want to buy that $10,000 insurance that cost us $40 million, right? And finally, show some fiscal responsibility to establish trust, right? Don't overspend. Don't ask for more than what you can chew on. If you can't scale out to a certain point with whatever automation tool, Chef or anything, don't ask for all of the licenses up front when you can kind of scale out over the course of a couple of years potentially, or several months, or however the subscription for whatever you're purchasing is. So taking a look at a sample business case, So this isn't the exact business case we used at CUNY Mutual Group to bring Chef in, but it brings in some of the elements that we definitely used. So to start off with just a basic summary, sometimes executives or the business or who's going to make the decision whether or not to bring in your tool, sometimes they don't want to read the whole business case, and you shouldn't take that personally. Sometimes it's just not a priority for them. So summing it up, the summary statement really should be a sentence or two, and it should be very concise and straight to the point, right? So in the sample business case, I led with, in order to support business outcomes and reduce risk organization-wide, right? So I'm keying in on factors that a business would potentially care about. We're asking for funding, right? So there's the ask, so that we can consistently secure our systems and detect configuration drift that potentially threatens our customer data, right? That's verbiage that's very business-centric and very customer-focused. The next portion kind of dives into what it's going to do for us, the WIF and what's in it for me, and talks about Chef Infra allowing to enforce security configurations, right? So this talks about how it's going to prevent configuration drift that will affect that customer data, right? Again, business terms focused on the customer, focused on the business. It also talks about audits, right? That's the other thing the business is going to care a lot about. Is, are we going to pass our next audit? How will we pass our next audit? How can we be proactive about passing our next audit? Chef Inspect this is where you can bring in Chef Inspect into your business case and talk about tests that are provided to you as part of the subscription to Chef Automate. Reduced infrastructure misconfiguration outages would be the next section, when we start to talk about, okay, so we had this much downtime and this much customers facing outages, and we've lost this much time over these many years because of misconfiguration or configurations that don't match. And this is how we're going to start preventing those outages, which is going to reduce risk. And then finally, obviously, there's going to be a cost section in your business case. Your business case always needs to have concise numbers. This is how much this vendor is going to charge us for this service. There shouldn't be, oh, it probably will cost us. Try to get exact numbers as much as you can, so that there are no surprises on that final document. So I'd like to talk a little bit about providing Chef Infra as a service. Providing good architecture. The way we've managed to scale Chef Infra out at CUNY Mutual Group has been by treating Chef Infra like a service that we provide to others. We want to encourage its use wherever it makes sense and responsible, but obviously we don't want it to be used where it's not being used responsibly, or it's outside the best practices. And by enabling it as a service for our teams to consume, we've been able to actually have success throughout development and operations teams. We've seen huge gains on development teams consistently configuring their infrastructure. And we've definitely seen some great use on the operations side as well. So one of the key pieces of providing Chef Infra as a service is good architecture. You may need to you need to make sure your architecture is able to support on-prem systems as well as your cloud-native systems. When designing your architecture, try to encompass both when reasonable. Often you might start off in the cloud because it's easier to automate in the cloud, but you might have to try to encompass your on-prem environments as well. And really wherever you have virtual machines. If you start to have configuration drift between your different data centers, it can really become hectic. If a Windows VM here isn't configured the same as a Windows VM there, it's just a big pain. Your VM specs are also really important. If you're going to be scaling it to thousands of servers, make sure that your VM specs are really going to match that. Especially disk. The one thing our organization has noticed, and we re-architected our Chef Automate instance, was we kept running out of disk space because we kept pulling in so much compliance data. In so much Chef client run data, and we weren't pruning that data. But we also realized the way we'd architected the drives didn't allow for any sort of expansion. So we ended up re-architecting, and fortunately we were able to do that. But do keep an eye on that data retention period as well in Chef Automate, just as kind of a quick tip. You should also make sure that you architect your firewall for all of the scenarios that you might have. It may not come up all the time, and you may only deal with isolated or air-gapped parts of your network every once in a while, but documenting and ensuring that your firewalls are allowing the traffic early on can save you headaches later. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the upgrade lifecycle, kind of related to your architecture. So how often are you going to upgrade each Chef Infra component? Are you ensuring that the version of Chef Client and Chef Workstation matches the version of Chef Client on your servers? What about on your test kitchen machines? Are you using persistent virtual hard drives or virtual box images, or are you building fresh every time you build in the cloud? Kind of making sure that all of your components are kind of lining up. Doesn't have to be super hard. You just have to be very mindful about that. You can leverage RSS feeds and notifications from Chef about upgrades to keep an eye out for kind of important upgrades or security patches, or just maybe even a new feature that you might want to take advantage of. Also, try and keep an eye on those deprecations. If you've had Chef Infra running for a few major versions, chances are you've got legacy code that will break, or if you have some custom cookbooks that you might not have written with best practices, that code might not be useful. I mean, we even ran into this recently just with some simple loop logic within one of our cookbooks where it just couldn't read an array properly. Finally, but not the least of these items, is to practice and honestly get good at upgrading your Chef Infra client. It's probably the most labor-intensive part of all of your upgrades, including the deprecation research. And in the case something does go poorly, let's talk a little bit about disaster recovery. So DR is what I like to say, being prepared for what you can reasonably be expected to. You can't be expected to react to every single situation that's ever going to happen. But for what you can plan for, you should. Whether it's an upgrade that went sideways, an infection, or natural disaster, definitely have a DR for the major cases you can probably dream up. Your plan should include how you're going to recover individual nodes. This may vary greatly depending on your recovery software, whether it's rebuilding the VM and overlaying the config on a fresh OS, and just deploying a new policy file, or just setting the run list again, or restoring from a backup. I've even read some articles about people going as far as to back up their client keys. You should also have a plan for recovering your Chef Automate. There's a ton of data in Chef Automate your organization probably cares about. The core of it is in compliance in most cases, right? That's how you're going to prove that you were compliant over the last year, or that's how you might have detected something going on within your environment. You can back it up at the VM level. There's also ways to back up and export kind of like the database, right? And there's good documentation on how to do that. So you don't really have to invent the wheel, but just make sure you know how to do it and you've planned for it. You should also have a plan in place for cookbook recovery. This can kind of be a defense in depth, right? The norm is most certainly for you to have your cookbooks in version control. But having an offline copy of kind of some of your core configurations can be valuable in case you happen to be recovering in like an environment that cannot reach your version control. I can imagine a few scenarios where that might happen. You should also plan on recovering your supermarket. Now, some people might just kind of leave the supermarket out, but it's an incredibly valuable tool, right, for sharing cookbooks across the organization, and is a key part of the development lifecycle. So it's part of your chef infrastructure. Show your supermarket some love. And finally, as always, a plan that has not been tested is not a plan. It's a theory. Test your DR plans when the unthinkable happens. You're going to be ready for it, right? Disasters can be hard to predict, but some can be predicted. And that kind of leads us into monitoring. Like any other service, Chef Infra should be monitored too. Because Chef Infra is a core component to keeping your system secure and to monitoring the compliance of those systems, things like URL and resource monitors, using your monitoring tool of choice, should be easily configurable. Those are some pretty straightforward things to configure in, I think, almost any monitoring solution out there. But also monitoring services that Chef Infra and Chef Automate run as well can give you easy tips on how to engage support should something go wrong on your systems. Rather than just shooting in a ticket saying, oh, my Chef Automate server is broken, you can actually start with some more data saying, hey, these 3 services have crashed 42 times over the past day. That kind of narrows the scope and will increase kind of like your mean time to resolve. You can also keep an eye on Chef client run failures, right? On Windows systems, it's as easy as watching for a specific event to generate incidents. So you don't even have to hook into the Chef Automate or Chef APIs. You can just use your regular monitoring solution to pull that specific event ID when it happens. And oh, by the way, it can be self-healing because Chef Run Success is also another event ID, just to kind of get you thinking on that. And really, Chef client run failures matter, because when Chef client fails to run, how do you know that system is still secure or still enforced, right? Especially if audit's only running every few hours rather than every hour. Compliance failures should also be monitored. It's not just an audit issue. If something that you have defined as a baseline hardening rule has failed, that means your systems are exposed and vulnerable to would-be attackers. It kind of gives you that proactive blue team mentality of going in and fixing vulnerabilities as they appear or as they are appearing. Rather than waiting for somebody on your red team to let you know, hey, there's a problem on these 6 servers. And they just happen to catch it with their monthly scan. Monitoring network flow is also extremely important. There's firewall changes going on all the time at organizations. And if you have half of your servers that aren't checking in because of a firewall rule, or they can't send their compliance data because of destination unreachable issues, it's really important to keep an eye on the network flow to make sure information is still going back and forth. And then one more topic for the Chef Infra as a service would be access. So I like to call access as getting valuable information to those who need it, not those who potentially want it, but those who absolutely need it. And so that involves providing access to Chef Automate for the most part. Chef Automate will provide a ton of information to those who need it, but I mean, the trick is just making sure you have good role-based access. Ensuring that you have ensuring that you follow good role-based access for those who need it to see what's happening on their servers, such as development teams, trying to determine if like, hey, what changed on my server in the last day that potentially caused my application to break? They may not need to see every vulnerability associated with that server. Depending on how your staffing looks like, maybe you don't have people who have been at the company for very long, and really, inside attacks are just as threatening or more threatening than external attackers in a lot of cases. It's really simply following the least privilege access. Who needs to see what? You should make sure that your compliance viewers are people who really need to see compliance. Your system administrators, some of your IT managers, and of course your compliance folks should have access to the compliance data. But not necessarily everybody in the company needs to be able to get to your vulnerability section. Really, is what I like to call it sometimes, your compliance section. You should also be sure to vault every one of your secrets and tokens. It's kind of interesting. As you bring a new tool into an organization, there's this phase where you try it out, and then sometimes that try it out infrastructure sticks as the permanent infrastructure, and things like tokens and secrets sometimes don't get to where they need to be, where all the administrators for that specific service or product can get to it. So it's important to focus on that aspect early on as you bring a tool in, is make sure if you're going to keep an infrastructure, like a proof of concept infrastructure around permanently, that you vault all of those tokens and secrets, because 3 years from now, you might not be the person administering that environment. And kind of on the vein of accessibility is the next topic, the next major topic, which is going to be reducing friction when adopting Chef Infra. On removing friction, it's kind of that key element of mise en place when you think about it. Making sure whatever you're doing, it requires a minimal amount of effort. You shouldn't have to do very much to use good automation. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about flash builds and how they can kind of enable removing that friction. So flash builds are an excellent way to remove friction when it comes to adopting Chef Infra, and really honestly any tool. Flash builds are incredible. They have that hackathon-like spirit. They're like a miniature hackathon. They're only 1 to 2 days of extremely focused effort to try to produce that outcome. In our case, usually like a Chef Infra cookbook to accomplish a task within our organization, such as to install certain software or to install and upgrade certain software. They definitely allow focused learnings. Teams are required to focus during a flash build, right? People don't show up to hackathons and start working on something else generally. Kind of like that the base rules that you set during a hackathon are that everybody's swarming and pairing on this one task to try to accomplish it. It also allows teams to address concerns, questions, fears in a more comfortable environment than a classroom would traditionally provide. People tend to not be as afraid to ask a question when they're surrounded by their peers versus like when they're in a large classroom environment. Flash builds also provide a tangible, usable increment. So, there's this investment. This product owner is allowing their team to work, for 2 days straight on something that wasn't what they initially planned for a sprint. But at the very end, they still get handed this usable increment that they can deploy out to production. It's also a good way of marketing. Everybody learns a new skill and they come out with this positive association of your product. Hey, like I use Chef Infra to deploy my application out or to deploy the infrastructure for my application. That's a good positive experience where somebody might have had to rely on another team to do that before. And then finally, flash builds build a skill set among new community members. So the next time someone asks to help on your chat with Chef Infra, you're not the only one answering that question. You're not that single point of contact that everybody looks to as the chef guy or the chef girl, right? That can be an extremely burden lifting effect of flash builds. And I'd like to talk a little bit about communication. So constant communication is truly just being as transparent as possible. And transparency builds essential trust. One important agile practice, right, is to be extremely transparent when things go right, and especially when things go wrong. When you constantly communicate with your community, you establish a high level of trust. We provide multiple layers of communication for people consuming Chef at CUNY Mutual Group to get help. One effective way we manage to establish that level of communication with our community is through a chat channel. We post announcements such as updates, outages, upgrades ahead of time, as well as when they're finished. We also have good centralized documentation in a place where it's easily seen, and that documentation is kept up to date. We also have a distribution list that teams can contact by email. And last but not least, if a team needs extended help, they can just put in a service ticket, and our product owner can prioritize that against our sprint backlog and open this conversation with our customers. And that's definitely really aided our communication. And kind of keying in on some of that centralized documentation, establishing good development patterns is a good way to remove friction from your Chef Infra implementation. Developing a long-term test kitchen strategy is super vital. Local testing is one of the things that makes Chef Infra so special, and ensuring that your development pattern extends to every single platform the developer uses is also important. If you have developers using like a virtual desktop, Mac OS, Windows, finding common ground between all of those is something that will not only reduce the support that you do, but also build a common language between your development platforms, right? So if somebody's developing on Mac OS and Windows, you're not talking about two different kitchen YAML formats, potentially, right? Having documentation that's also up to date and easy to use is super important for removing friction. There's nothing that slows people down more than out of date documentation. And really having somebody other than your team read and provide feedback on that documentation is also important. It's very difficult being taught a technology or like reading a paper written by an expert because they're an expert. Unless they have the training, like experience in training, that documentation tends to be written at an expert level. And that can be hard for somebody new to digest. So consider your audience as you're writing your documentation. Who are you writing your documentation for? And along with that documentation goes your CI/CD pipelines. Nothing is more frustrating besides potentially, reading documentation from an expert than trying to get your CI/CD pipeline built for a technology that you're just starting with, right? And if that CI/CD pipeline is difficult to use, you might just go back to using what's easier, right? So it's all about removing that friction. In something else you want to make sure with your development patterns is make sure you have them built for all of your hosted platforms as well. Meaning if you have Windows servers in your environment and Linux servers in your environment, make sure that you have development patterns for those established as well, so people know how to kind of structure and build their cookbooks out, or how to build an omnibus cookbook. And you should definitely try to architect your secrets management strategy early on as far as development patterns go, and determine where they should live, whether that's in Chef's ecosystem or in the CI/CD pipeline for the application. One surefire way to get some of these development patterns even like automated is to code absolutely everything you can. And there are some things here that we can code. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those. So cookbook generators can be leveraged to a great degree. Make the cookbook generator work for you. You can generate a cookbook generator and then append it with your organization standards. A cookbook at one organization may not look the same at another. So code in and make your cookbooks look exactly the same as far as like the starting structure, and things will be much more familiar for you to help troubleshoot. And that goes for your builds and releases too. At CUNY Mutual, we actually have our CI/CD pipelines produced as code when we generate a cookbook. So every time we generate a cookbook, you get your CI/CD pipeline as well. You should also have your generators, or just have good example tests out there in general. Make sure that people understand the value of test-driven development, because not everybody does. It's a good standard to follow, and test-driven development will greatly increase the accuracy of your cookbooks. And don't reinvent the wheel, right? Extend community cookbooks and add functionality when you can, and share that functionality when you can. I realize your organizations might not want you to share that code, and that makes a lot of sense. It's code that you've written on their dime. But at the same time, share that functionality, if and when you can. It just makes the community that much better. And last but not least, I'd like to talk a little bit about feature toggling with Chef Infra. And this is definitely kind of a newer pattern that we're establishing internally, but we'd like to share it because it's so far been pretty successful for us. So feature toggles are not new to software development and code in general. And they're awesome for pushing code out to production without actually making a change on a system. They can minimize the risk of releasing an impactful change to many systems simultaneously. They allow us to release our code out into production faster. If nothing's actually changing on the system that we're pushing our code to, we can get our code out any time of day. And if a change does break something, backing out, having a backout toggle allows us to quickly fix the system that had an issue with the change. It also allows development teams to have more control over the changes on their systems, right? So with traditional enterprise and big companies, generally code got pushed out to a ton of systems, and if you broke one system, you might have to back out everywhere, depending on which deployment technology you're using. But using feature toggles, it kind of allows development teams to have more agency over their systems and have more control. It also kind of changes the mentality of change in general, right, at your organization, because it allows testing when convenient, not when required. So instead of saying everybody needs to come in tonight and test this big change we're putting in, now you can say, hey, we pushed this change out and you've got 3 weeks to toggle it on before we have this required period, right? So it changes the conversation. So a team can say, oh, well, we're doing another change tomorrow night anyways, so we might as well do this one too, right? It kind of, it breaks down that barrier between dev and ops by giving the development team choice. And it generally increases the overall security posture. Again, to the big change versus the agile change. When you can implement a change on 95% of your systems and exclude 5% that are having the issues, it's much better than backing out a change entirely because of that 5%, depending on the nature of the change and how it can be implemented. So I have an example feature toggle I'm gonna pull up here. So here's an example of a feature toggle using tags as the controlling toggle. So if a system is tagged vulnerability disable, it's going to put a registry key with a value of 0 somewhere. And to enable, if the system is tagged, so like let's say this is a backout let's say we were disabling something that was vulnerable. If we're going to enable something, we just put a value of 1 back in there. Let's say the system had a hard time or the application kept crashing because of a dependency, and needs a code change before that can go back in. You can turn it right back on using a toggle. Last but not least, I'm going to talk a little bit, or I'm going to bring up a sample backlog and kind of walk through it pretty quickly here. So I have an Azure DevOps backlog pulled up here, and like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I will be putting this on my personal blog kind of in a table format, so it's easier to digest, so not everybody has to request access to this temporary Azure DevOps project I created. And so, here's an idea or some ideas for kind of like how you can lattice out your backlog. And these aren't in any particular order, but, creating your core cookbooks, making sure that you have a good hardening cookbook for your baseline standards, right? And then maybe starting to go out, branch out, you can have your web hosting cookbook. Here's that DR plan I was talking about, creating a DR plan for all of your components, right? And not only like creating that plan, but like testing that DR plan out for your components. Those Chef Infra development standards I was talking about, that's super important to start to like reduce that friction and increase that level of communication with your community. Develop those cookbook standards, like your naming standards, your naming scheme, creating that good development documentation, even potentially creating automated linting so that every time somebody checks their code in, it gets linted before it gets built. And then maybe even start working on your feature flags. You might want to develop some standards on how those feature flags are toggled on and off, or who can toggle them on and off. Some of your chef community tools, like creating your Slack and Teams channel, creating a service dashboard so people can see what's going on with your service at all times. That includes your monitoring components and your supported versions. Creating a community wiki even, where if somebody wants to create an article how to do this one thing that they thought was going to be useful to everybody else, they might be able to create that post there. Having a good rollout strategy in general for Chef Infra is important. It's exciting to go and start installing Chef Client everywhere, but you really need to have a plan for how you're going to roll it out. Because you have a bunch of servers that didn't start off with Chef on it, most likely, if you're just starting to adopt the tool and your company's existed for more than a few days. So how are you going to deploy to those brownfield servers without impacting them? How are you going to, implement that Chef Client into your greenfield deployment strategy? How does it fit into your provisioning pipeline? And developing a good upgrade strategy, knowing how and when you're going to be upgrading Chef Infra, or where you're going to be upgrading it first. And also just deploying that Chef Infra architecture, right? I did qualify this with this, these aren't all in order, but you're going to have to get a Chef Infra server out there. You're going to get your Chef Automate server in your Chef Supermarket. Where are they going to be? How large are they going to be? What platform are they going to live on? Then you can actually get to deploying your Chef Infra agents, deploy your brownfield agents and implementing the bootstrap process and provisioning pipelines. And then finally, and absolutely not the least of them all, is to actually implement those inspect tests. These are where you're really going to see value, especially on those brownfield nodes that are not necessarily being configured by Chef immediately, but you can at least have audit running, letting you know the state of your compliance. And implementing pre-baked sys controls, or DevSec controls or STIG controls, and then convert your internal controls that you've written as a company, like things that you want to harden on top of those, and convert those to inspect tests as well. So that's just kind of some ideas on a sample backlog to get you going. So at this time, I'm going to open up to any questions, and for those of you who are not staying, just stay safe, please.
Wow, that was excellent, Justin. Thank you so much. If anyone has questions, you can use the Q&A app, which is at the bottom of your screen, or if you've got a mic and you want to ask a question with talking, I think you can raise your hand. I should be able to see that and let you ask your question that way. So I'll kick off. I had one. As you're talking to people in your organization about like the things that they're expecting out of the automation and things like that. Was there anybody that it was kind of surprising to you that they were interested or that they wanted to be involved or that you hadn't maybe been thinking about in talking to about automation and stuff like that?
Honestly, there were a lot of managers that I didn't expect to engage us that were really excited to potentially get that level of automation in the hands of their developers or the development teams. We definitely had at least one of our offices that really kind of took off with the tool. They just adopted it very quickly and then very minimal help, and they were able to just do a lot with it. So there was a lot more excitement than I thought there would be. Often it's like a new application feature that's going to get a lot of attention from management, not necessarily an infrastructure tool. So that was kind of surprising.
Awesome, excellent. Mark would like to know how long you guys have been using Chef.
So we have been using Chef for almost 3 years now, I think. I was trying to kind of count the days and months when before I started presenting, but yeah, it's been almost 3 years that we've had Chef in our organization. And definitely started off very small, right? I think our initial amount of servers was like 30, and we've scaled up well over 1,000.
Awesome. Anybody else while we're here? Oh, here's one. Where do your servers run? Are you running in the cloud or some other kind of like EC2 or public cloud system? Do you have your own data centers? Are you?
We're using public cloud, and we're also using our own data centers. So we have a couple of data centers that we run Chef Infra in, as well as kind of like this building cloud presence.
Has that caused any trouble for you? Have you found that kind of easy to manage, that sort of cross environment stuff?
It's interesting. I attended Gartner conference this last December, and I sat in a talk and somebody said something that kind of struck me, which was it's easier to automate in public cloud and then bring those lessons back into your data center. But because we're such an established company, and we've been around for a long time, we actually started automating in our data center first and are bringing those lessons to public cloud. So it's this interesting like reversal of that general situation.
Cool. There's one in the chat from Anthony. How difficult was it to sell people on using Chef data outside of Chef for things like ServiceNow or Tableau?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? My headset was buzzing.
Yeah, he says, how difficult was it to sell people on using Chef data outside of Chef for things like maybe ServiceNow or Tableau?
Okay. So I don't think it was very difficult to sell people on the value of it. I think the biggest difficulty is potentially trying to get it like prioritized from a work stream perspective. We're finding different ways to kind of implement components of Chef around the environment, like our CMDB, for example. We're trying to figure out how we might link up information from a Chef client run potentially into the CMDB, so that it's consumable from that level.
Cool. We have a classic DevOps question here. So how many people are on a team managing all your Chef things versus versus the size of sort of the dev teams that would be utilizing that infrastructure?
Yeah, so we have 4 or 5 people on the kind of like the Chef service side of things, and then we have several development teams. I don't have the exact count, but several development teams, and yeah, I think our Scrum team sizes are roughly 6 to 9 people.
Do your dev teams then, do they end up like writing cookbooks? Have they adopted that kind of pattern to sort of write or manage their own deployment that way?
Yeah. So the dev teams definitely have adopted writing cookbooks, and that's actually where we've concentrated a decent amount of effort. Translating our baseline server configs, like hardening configs, was pretty straightforward. The hardest and most complicated code for us is writing cookbooks that the developers can use to configure their applications. But that's also where we've seen great gains in things like server migration from Server 2008 to Server 2016. You know, we're not using Chef Habitat right now as an organization. So the best automation tool that these teams have to self-serve is Chef Infra. So we've had entire remote locations that of app teams actually say, you know what, we're going to write all of our infrastructure configuration as code so that we can just get off of these old servers and get onto the new servers.
Cool. One follow-up on that one. Did you guys start out using recipes for common cookbooks, or are you using your code more to do like custom resources and things? It sounds like you guys used a lot of Windows. So was there stuff that you had to like customize there on top of Chef that way?
Early on, there was probably more custom resources and recipes. A lot of it was we translated some like PowerShell DSC stuff and just some regular PowerShell scripts over. So at the very beginning, it was a lot of PowerShell script resources, but as time allowed, we started to translate things into more Chef native resources. One of the approaches we try to take is if it's declarative, it's better than an imperative resource where you have to like write out your whole guard. If somebody's already done it, like, you know, like a file resource, for example, you know, don't try to PowerShell script it. Just use the native resource.
Awesome. One more in the chat. How difficult was it to scale Chef? And did you have any gotchas to recommend people look out for?
So one of the gotchas is definitely be careful with your marketing. Don't be more overzealous than a salesperson might be, or that you might expect to be. It can probably hurt you a little bit more than help you. But try to be patient with it. It's, you know, sometimes it can be difficult, like knowing like, oh, I think I can solve this problem right now. But, you know, don't try to go it alone. You know, definitely realize that there's, you know, a team for a reason, and try to keep everybody in the loop as much as possible, and don't get discouraged. You know, change takes time. Change is uncomfortable for people, so you know it's not going to happen overnight, most likely, but it will happen.
Awesome. Let's see. Back to the Q&A. How are you addressing orchestration right now? Like things for, do you have orchestration among like MS SQL clusters or other components that need to know about each other? What are you using anything particular for that?
So right now we're not doing anything where we're orchestrating among the nodes. Each node is very much standalone at this point.
Cool. That's an easy to solve for right there.
Yeah.
Does the central Chef Services team manage cookbook reviews, or do you push that out to Scrum teams?
We kind of have a hybrid approach. So we definitely help our Scrum teams out as they're writing their cookbooks, or if they need help. And we'll just kind of review their code on the fly as we look at their cookbook when they're having a problem, or just remind them, hey, don't forget to cook style. But you know, we let them kind of push and promote their own code at that, you know, at some level.
Cool. All right, last one. We're almost at the top of the hour. BJ would like to know, do you use multi-cloud or focus on a single cloud provider? You've got that Azure DevOps going there that looks super sharp. So.
You know, right now we focus on a single cloud provider. That's where the majority of our stuff is. And I didn't ask too much about what I'm allowed to say in this, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
No. All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Justin. That was excellent. Thank you for being our first session to record as well. I hope everyone had a good experience. If you did have any trouble, I will take some feedback. Mandy at chef.io, that would be great. In the meantime, please sign up for ChefConf. June 2nd, you'll see this session. You might want to come back to this one and catch up on all the things that were talked about. See it again. That's at chefconf.io. Sign up there to be included for June 2nd. Justin, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care, people.